What's up, guys? My name is Gustavo, and today we're going to be talking about a fantastic web framework called Phoenix. So what is Phoenix framework? It's a powerful web framework built in an amazing language called Elixir. Let me tell you, it is a game changer. With Phoenix, you can easily build RESTful APIs for your web application. It's like a magical. Elixir brings us this powerful framework not only for RESTful APIs, which is something that we're going to learn today, but for building web applications and also real-time application using sockets. It's fantastic, and it's a easier way to build fantastic applications using Elixir, much more easier than you think. So I hope you like this video and enjoy it. So let's go ahead. What we're going to do is that we're going to create our project following some steps related to Phoenix and live view. If you don't know and if you don't have your local machine set up to use Elixir, I highly recommend you to see a video that I'm recommending here on the YouTube channel. And what we're gonna do is that we're gonna create our project using mix.phx new. Creating our project, we're gonna call it deliveries. But I would like to give you some advice when we are creating project. Some people usually create using APIs with no install, no HTML, giving the app name, sharing the database that they are gonna use. But I highly recommend creating as a default and just add the binary ID. We can add sometimes the no HTML, no assets, no email, but all of them in the application when we are creating a live view application, Phoenix application is tiny, and sometimes in a short future, if you want to create HTML, move to a live view, it's going to be much more complex. So create your app as default at the beginning. This is my recommendation, and just sometimes add the binary ID, because the binary ID is easier to scale instead of using the integer, which is fantastic thing that you can do when you are creating your apps. Just add the binary ID, because binary ID will provide us default architecture to using the UID or something like that. And after that, we just need to run the commands. But before running commands, we can have the mixdeps.get, and after mixdeps.get, which is default when you create your Phoenix applications. So it's straightforward too. What happened is that we're gonna create the application. After creating the application, we can just wait a little bit, and after finish creating our app, I will go back here. So now what do we have? We have a way to run some commands, so we can start run the migrations, install the dependencies, and now let's start open the VS Code and start coding. And one of the things that I highly recommend you to do before you start coding is to install a dependency called mixtest.watch. Elixir is so easy for testing, so easy to move forward creating tests. So just copy the dependency and add at the end, because following good practice is good, and if you want to know a little bit more, you can go ahead and see how your Elixir Pro course work. And now let's run all of our tests before we start coding, because that is very important. While we are running the test, so basically what do we have? Every time that we are using Mix is a way to manage the dependencies and manage our project. And as you can see, we have the aliases and applications. And applications, we have a way to restart our application, which is Great. So we're going to start the process related to every dependencies. Some of them are repo related to Acto, the pub sub. After pub sub, we have the dependency to use the telemetry, the Finch, and also one of the most important for us now is the endpoint where we start our application. If you go to the endpoint, as you can see, we are using the OTP app, which is great. And when we have it, we need to set up some configurations on our app. So if we go to the folder called configs, as you can see, we have a way to start the endpoint, starting some couple things related to security, some things related to cores, and one of the most important here, as you can see, we have a couple things related to the ES build, where is the output and where we can host images, CSS to. In this case, we're not going to use that, but it's very important to you open the folder and check what we have, because the folder, when you add some files there, you can use through our app. As you can see, we have the environments too. In this case, we're using test. Remember when I told you about following the video related to set up your local machine? As default, when we start our Elixir apps in Phoenix, we have the Postgres, where the database and password is the same. And now, what we're going to do is let's start creating our database, because we already have the Docker. And I recommend you to follow the tutorial to create your image Docker related to the Postgres. And then we have a little bit more things. But one of the most important things related to the endpoint is that at the end, when we have all the sockets configurations, where you have the live reloading, where you have the plugs and something like that, the most important is at the end, we got the router. Because we have the router, what we're going to do is that let's start checking it, because the endpoint is where we are going to start our process, and the router file is where we have the setup for browser, and the most important for us is the setup for the APIs. As you can see, the code is commented, and as you can see too, we have the plug related to API. We're not going to learn how controller works, how HTML and live view works. We're going to be focused on our creating our API. And to do that, what we're going to do, we're going to start creating our first service. And to create our first services, we're going to start creating our test before uncomment the API services. And before creating our service, first of all, let's start run our tests and focus on the path that I'm sharing with you. It's start passing. It's passing for now because we're just running the controllers, but we need to start creating our controllers, and I will give you some advices to make your code more organized. We're gonna follow the full architecture that Phoenix 1.7 recommends. So what we're gonna do, let's start creating our folder for start testing. And when we create our folder, first of all, let's just uncomment the API and just adding one module called API 2. You will understand why, because what I like to do is that we have our controllers, and I like split the responsibility between controllers handling with API and HTML. So now let's start creating our API folder and start creating our controllers too. And one of the things that we're going to create is the user controller test. And then let's creating our module. After creating our module, we need to start using some resources for tests that Elixir and Phoenix provide for us. So if you go to the support page, as you can see, we have the connection file, which is related to some configurations focused on creating a connection. And this is interesting because it's so similar with the real world too. And after start using it, we need to start creating our first test. Why we are using TDD? Because Elixir provide us a fantastic way to do that. I know that the code that it was created was not me. I'm using the GitHub Copilot. I highly recommend too. And after creating our test, so basically what do we have? A get service where we are going to a router, and this router is going to be the user, but let's just move to use the Phoenix 1.7 pattern because it's much more easier to read. So this came from it, the way that you saw it came from the Phoenix 1.7 earlier, but this way for me is much better and easier to understand too. And after that, let's start creating a couple of things. One of them is the setup. We are going to start creating our setup and add some configurations related to API. So we're gonna change our connection, just start adding the header related to application.json, because this is gonna be much more straightforward, because this is the pattern that we are using to create our application. And following the TDD, as you can see, we got our first error related to the router is not found. So because the router is not found, we need to start creating our services, which is something similar with our test. We are gonna create a get to users and create our controller. As you can see, we have a module and the function. Because we have it, it's complaining because the module does not exist. The first error saying that the path does not exist. Now the module does not exist. So what do we have here in TDD? Red, green, and refactor. And our first step is to make the test not pass. We have a red message, and then let's start fixing it. To fix that, we need to go to the controller, creating our API folder. After creating our API folder, we're gonna create our controller too, called user controller. And now, creating our module, the error now is different because it's complaining because we don't have the init. We need to set up as a controller our module. And to do that, we can just use the same file that we have. So it's delivers controller, and explain that it is a controller. This is the way that we have all the plugs related to and macros related to a controller. If you go to the same module, as you can see, we have the controller, we have the channel, we have the macros related to the live view, everything that we need. Now, because we have it, we need to start handling with our application, and some of them is the function. We need to create the function called index. We created the module, we have the path, the alias to the module. Now we need to start creating the index, and by default we have the connection and the params. And now, as you can see, the GitHub Copilot already suggested something, but basically what we're gonna do is that we're gonna create a render with the index JSON, and the data is gonna be empty. The error is gonna be a little bit more different because it's complaining that we don't have the index JSON and we don't have the user JSON file created. This is a new way after Phoenix 1.7 to handle with the JSON objects with Elixir. I personally like it a lot, which is great. So let's start creating the module and start handling with the data. So now what we're gonna do is just a way that we need to create our index. As you can see, we have the string, and now we're gonna receive the users. You saw that I added the data because the Copilot did that. But basically what we're gonna do is just that handling with many users, but we're not gonna use the render many. This is much more straightforward in this Phoenix 1.7 version. We are going to create a form where we can have the users, and then we just need to return a map. Let me just move to the full function on Elixir, not a simple one. And then we need to handle with the user JSON. And to do that, we just need to call the function, the user JSON. Let's just change a little bit more. We're creating a private function called data. And this is gonna be straightforward. I'm gonna use the Copilot because we need to send the user, the name, the email. Let's get rid of the timestamps params. And let's just add the delivery man and the response, which is gonna be one of the informations that we're gonna have. It's gonna be true or false. You're gonna learn a little bit more about that, and let's just create a format again. And now, because we have this function, let's just make a couple more refactors on the code. This is from by default always returning the data, and now it's correct. Let me just check a couple things, and just one more thing, let's use the map because I feel map makes our code much more organized. Let's add the users and then add the data as a function that we're going to execute. It's complaining because we need to pass the user and we need to return the users, but on our controller we are sending the data, which is a problem. Just made one more change, is user with JSON everything in a uppercase, and let's just change it and see the test, and now it's gonna pass. As you can see, we created our first API using Elixir and Phoenix. I'm gonna teach you a lot of techniques that you can use through your code base. But let's make the test fail once again, adding a couple more params. So what we're gonna do is the users will not be an empty list. The user will be something from the database, and we need to start preparing our controller to handle with the context. So let's just add a couple more informations. Our test will fail. It is intentional because having this test failing, we have the controller done. When we have the mock data related to the users, what we're going to do is start preparing our context and also testing it too. Now, because it's working, we can start executing our app. But before, let me just commit everything because I like seeing the steps that we are running. And after committing, let me just send one commit and make all the green files being gray, just to organize myself. I like to do that. There you go. So now let's start running the app, and let's use you can use the, I think it's Postman. I like using the Insomnia, but there is one tool on VS Code that I never use. I want to try. And after I start running the app, let's see the Insomnia. In this case, this is what I'm using. I'm gonna create the URL to the service, and the service will be a get. So by default from Elixir and Phoenix app is localhost 4000. Let's just add the path. related to the user. When we do it, I know that our test is broken, but I just want to share with you that our API now is working, which is great, and we didn't create a lot of things. Now we need to start preparing our app to handle with the users and the database too. And what we're gonna do is we need, once again, start creating our test. What I'm teaching you is something that is so powerful that there's no Elixir course teaching it for you. So we need to start creating our library related to our context, our folder. And after creating the folder, we need to start creating our context file, which is going to be the users. And when we create that, it's fine. We are running all our tests and we have one broken. We're going to fix that quickly. But before, let's create our module and use one more thing. I shared with you the connection case. As you can see, we are using the data case that we have on the support too. And now let's add our context. It's explaining that the GitHub Copilot is trying to help me, but in this case, we're not going to use that. And now we need to start creating a way to list the user. So this is going to be our first test that we are going to create just on me. After this class, your life is going to change using Elixir. So now let's create our test. So we are just going to use create like a mock user for now. We're going to use the database, but let's start creating our test. I just need to delete the end that I added. Sorry about that. And now we run our test and complaining always the same thing. We don't have the module and we don't have the function. So we need to start creating it to make our test pass. After making our test pass, we can move to the next step, handling with the database. So let's create our context, creating the module. After creating the module, it's complaining because we don't have our list function. And then let's make it just a little bit different. So I gave the name list. I'm confused about what is going to be the best name. So we have the list, and on our test we gave the name list users. Let's just use as list. I think it's good. And now we have like an empty list, and on our empty list we have a map. So let's start preparing the data. It's going to be mocked again. I know, but we are going to learn a couple techniques, which is great too. But now, one of the important things that we need to understand is how we are going to handle with the data on our tests when we need that. In the past, we usually create the factories. It worked, but now Elixir recommends us to create the fixtures. I personally like this way because we can do complex things using a couple lines, and it's so useful. We are going to create our fixture related to the user because we need to create users to handle with the database. We need to create users before to use our context, and sometimes with our REST applications too, and which is so straightforward. So we only need to create a function called user fixture. Sometimes this is so powerful because if you need params, you can send them, and if you don't need that, you can use the default that Elixir and Phoenix will provide for us in our setup too. It's straightforward. We need to get the attributes and then use the intro, where if we have the values on the attributes, we're going to change them on our map. And by default, you know that it's just a mock. We can create a mock name, mock email, and the email is going to be like, so it's simple, it's just an example. And by default, one of the informations that we are going to use is the delivery man. And we can add the delivery man to and say to. It's fine with that. And then one of the things that we need to create before our list, we need to create a function to create users. So let's use the alias to our user, and at the end it's gonna return OK in user, and we will know that, but we're gonna return the user when we need that. It's default from Phoenix. And now what we're gonna do is that we're gonna start creating our function to create the user to, and we are using now our fixture. We are returning the fixture, but unfortunately we don't have the function to create the user. We can come over to our fixture and go to our context and create the function. So basically what you're gonna receive is the map with all params, with all the fields and keys that we are gonna need. And to avoid mistakes, let's just add default if we're not gonna send the attributes an empty map. We are fine with that. And now unfortunately we don't have now we're gonna start using the power of Acto, where we are gonna create the chain set. The chain set we are gonna use to validate the data if we can insert in the repo to create our user into the database. It's complaining because we don't have the struct. Let's just creating default struct just to avoid the error, because I want to show you something more interesting on this project. We don't have the user of module 2. We need to create that to handle with the database. We're going to have our schema and our change set. The schema basically is a way to map the information from the database. And the change set is a way to validate the data before insert into the database. What we're going to use is the migration. The migration is a way to keep the history about the database and the relationship between the database with our Elixir project. So let's start creating our migration, and the command is mix acto.gen.migration, and then we can give the name to our migration. Let's just do one quick fix, because we need to create a struct because it's complaining that we don't have that. We're not going to use that, don't worry, but it's just for fixing this error at this moment, because we're creating everything on our hands. So let's just create a struct. We need almost nothing, just to follow the struct and follow the material. Now we created the migrations. After creating the migration, we need to start creating the table that we're going to use on our application. So the command is create table. We're not going to use the primary key. The way that we're going to create the primary key is this way. The Copilot helped me a lot. And this time, let's just make quick fix. One of them is the default. It's going to be default false. And new is going to be false too, because the delivery man is going to be a field related to permissions. And then creating a Unix index to the email. And after that, we can start handling with our migration and schema. One of the tips that I will give to you is that when you have your way to handle with the user, I like copying the migration fields, and then after copying the migration fields as you saw, when we create a schema, you only need to paste those commands and just change one thing. Just change to, instead of using the add, let's just change add to field and make one smaller thing too. But first of all, let's change add to field. And there you go. Our schema now is done. After the schema is done, what we're going to do is that we are going to executing our test. Now it started failing because we don't have the change set function. Copilot help me once again, where we have the cast, which is related to map the fields that we're going to need, the validate required, which is the fields that are required, and error when the constraint related to email is violated. But one of the things that I like to do is to have the fields mapped using the syntax that you're seeing using the module variable. And then let's just get rid of the cast and the validation required, adding the fields plus because it's going to be a map, and required fields. It's complaining because we don't have the cast. The cast is related to the change set. Let's just add the dependency. And now the error that we have is because we don't have the ID as binary. And by default, to define that, we can just add the primary key as a binary ID, auto-generate true. We don't have the foreign key, but let's just add this line too. Is default when you generate files, and you're gonna learn it. And there you go. Now our test is working, where we have the user comes from the database, and as you can see, the data are different now. And because we have the data comes from the database now, but the list is just an empty list, let's just use the repo.all users. And now it started working, but our API isn't, because now our context test is already working. And our API, we were using the mocked data, and to start connecting the context with our controller, we just need to create an alias. And creating the alias to the user, we only need to start using the context, replacing the mock data to users.list. And after adding that and format the code, now everything is passing, which is perfect, fantastic. You saw that how it's possible using simple techniques with TDD, creating the context, creating the API, easily using Elixir. You saw the get now, but before I teach you one more technique, I would like to create one more service with you. We have created the create function. Now we need to handle with that. Let me just commit the code quickly, because as I mentioned, just to split the responsibility. Now let's move to our next step, and our next step is related to creating a user. And let's start creating the test. It's going to be a little bit more different, this test, by default from Phoenix, but it's going to be useful too. So let's create the test. So the test that we are going to create is going to be a post. And the difference is tiny too. So let me just fix the Copilot here, because it was created a couple things for me, unnecessary couple things, so which is frustrated. Let me just fix the code now. And as you can see, we got the post here. We are gonna change some things. So let's just add some params. So the map will be the name and the email. We know that by default, the user the delivery main is false, we are fine with that because it's a tiny difference. You can add here on the test if you want, but it is unnecessary. Now on our test, we got the connection, so we created a connection, make a post. Now we need to start validating it. And to start validating, let's just copy the test, a couple things related to the test above. As I mentioned, it's going to be a little bit more different because we're not using the path relation. We're not going to have the creating the get specific user to. So we need to start making a couple more validations. So the test is created. But we did not create the API, the router, to handle with the user creation. So let's just create a couple more asserts because we have our get, and when we get the data, now it's an empty list. But when we use the post, what we need to do is that we need to check our data, check when we create our user, and call again the users services to list the users. We want to get those informations. And as you can see, the API is still failing. So now we know that the errors that we're going to handling. Now we can come over to our router and create our next service, which is going to be a post to users. The function will be different, of course, because the index is related to list the user. And what we're going to do, we're going to give the name of create. It's default from accrued related to Phoenix. It's going to be a little bit different. We're going to create a couple more validations, and I will teach you a technique to handle with failing data. And handling with the failing data, before creating the fallback controller, we are going to ask help for Phoenix to create that for us. So we need to receive the user and the params. You saw that how you can create it. Copilot, once again, is suggesting some stuff for us, but we are not going to use that. We're going to use the with. When it's returning for us, OK and user, we are going to return some data, and some of them is the ID. You saw that, but this is the condition that we are going to create. I mentioned to you that we are going to handle with the failures too, but this is what we need. Only change the status and show the user that we're going to create. You notice that it was generated for us the show.html, show.json, sorry. And what we're going to do, we need to handle with that. But before handling with that, let's just add in a couple more things. We need to validate if the user is user struct, and it's complaining because the show.json does not exist. Let's create it too. It's going to be the same. The main difference is that instead of unknown.map, we're going to only call the data function to return the data. So now just duplicate it, rename it using the singular name, and instead of using the unknown.map, let's just get rid of this and using the data function with the user. That's gonna be enough for the JSON. As you can see, the test is working. We're not gonna use the ID. The ID is just a way to check if we got the information. And right now, let me just check a couple more things, because we created that and then we went to the user. And now we refute that the user, the list of user is empty. we need as well testing when we got some errors. But before I'm gonna create the test, and after creating the test, just duplicate the test. And after creating the test, what we're gonna do is that I'm gonna teach you how to use the generate from Phoenix, because it's so useful. But what I explained to you is enough for you to start handling with generation and being more productive. So, finishing the test, what is the advantage of using the generates on Phoenix? You can move faster your code, but you need to be aware of what's going on. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made was start using the generator and Phoenix generates without understanding Phoenix. And what I explained for you about testing, about the context, about everything is enough for you to start being productive with the generates. And now we got our test. It's gonna fail. And that's fine, because instead of working with the failure scenario, we're going to use the fallback, and I'm going to explain to you the fallback on your code, because Phoenix will provide that for us. And basically, let me just push the code that we have, and basically context and Phoenix Rest, as you've learned, is enough. Just one more thing that's going to be useful after we use the generator will be handling with the folders, which is great. And just one more thing as well, we need to start using the Insomnia. As you could see, the latest things and the last things that I usually do is to test my service. It happens too with my live view applications. You need to ensure that your test is so good that basically you don't need to test as a user. And Elixir provided for us, which is so powerful. So now let's just create a test using the Insomnia, just to ensure that our API is working well, which is important. So now let's just purify the code. After purify, and now let me just see one failure, because the app is not running. So let's run the app, and after run the app, we can start testing. So I'm gonna keep the test working, because we wanna see the test passing too. But let's start the app and just try once again using the Insomnia to run our application. Just one more thing, run the migrations, and then there you go. It's working. It's creating the user correctly, and if you try again, and if you try again, or if you try to handle with the user, everything's gonna work. So now we are getting this error, and the error is related to the action that we don't have in our fallback. We got our conditional relation related to the width, but to avoid that, now we need to create one more context, and this context will be related to the deliveries. And deliveries, we have the user. You're gonna see a lot of fields, you're gonna see a lot of details related to our context that we are gonna create, and a lot of ways to handle with that. It's kind of the same when we are creating migration, but in this case we use the JSON, the context, the struct, and then the table. Now we can provide some fields. Some of them are the delivery man ID, and we can create a reference to our users table. You can use this syntax when you have the reference and the users. In this case, we need to the product that we're going to deliver, and this is a string. And as you can see, I added the two dots and then string to specify what is the field, but it's unnecessary when it is a string. The same for address, zip code, and neighborhood, so which is great. To city, state, as you can see, all of them are strings. And now the cancel at, we are going to say date, time, and other fields related to handling with date. But the same happen when you need to handle with decimal, integer, and works pretty well too. After the generator, let's walk a little bit through the code. It's complaining because I made a mistake. I made a mistake related to the context, which is the same name of our application, but this is straightforward. So what we can do here, instead of giving the same name of deliveries, what we can do, we can change it to orders. Then order, and the table will be orders too. That's the only difference. Sometimes I make this kind of mistakes when I'm creating a couple of stuffs. And then what we need to do is just adding the resources. What is the difference between the resources and when we specify the HTTP methods? The main difference is that we create the resources about post, patch, put, and delete. That is the main difference between, which makes our code tiny too. And as you can see, a lot of files was generated. Some of them are related to the context, some of them related to our controller, and especially the way that we can handle with errors now, which is so powerful. I could create this code with you, but it would take too much time. So that is why I decided not to create that with you. And as you can see, the JSON 2 was created. Not only the JSON, but especially the migration. So as you can see, even the unique field and reference was created too. The tests, everything is fine, which is a fantastic resource. But you need to be aware what is happening with your code when you use the generators. It's so productive. I've created a couple of softwares in the past using the generates. So productive, but once again, you need to be aware. You must be aware what's happening, what's going on, when and why you are creating that. So just push a little bit more about the code that we have created. So I highly recommend you to, if you have never used the generators before, so I highly recommend you to study a little bit more about the code base that we've created. And another thing, so you saw the fields that we've created, what we need to use, and I could test the insomnia with you right here, and I think I've already proved for you that it's gonna work. So you can try to use the insomnia, everything's gonna be fine. So we are finishing our class. Hope to see you the next video, and bye bye.